I'm going to hand over now to the first of our keynote speakers. So if you could put your hands together and give a very warm welcome, please, to Kathrin Shahroozi, the Senior Legal Technologist at Penningtons Manches Cooper.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Kathrin Shahroozi. I am the Senior Legal Technologist at Penningtons, where I lead our legal tech and AI strategy. But you will have to excuse the fact that I'm not a real estate lawyer and frankly know shockingly little about the real estate world compared to all of you. But what I do know is change management and how to implement technology using effective change management. And thankfully, that was the topic we agreed I speak on today, because otherwise we would have been in for a very uncomfortable next few minutes. Let me start out by sharing a little story. Back in 2013, and I'm really showing my age here, I was a chief officer working in municipal government in my home country of Austria. I was young and optimistic and enthusiastic about my first real digitalization project. We were set to move from an on-premise solution to the cloud, and we were upgrading our systems to the, at the time, latest version of government software. As you probably can imagine, even the latest version of government software had a specific feel to it, looked more like straight out of 1995. So there was not a lot of palpable change from the user experience side. And the biggest part of that transformation happened in the background, on the technical side. One thing, however, we had to change as we were transforming our whole IT structure was that we were also due to update to Windows 8, as the then used Windows XP had already exceeded the end of mainstream support, and we were getting dangerously close to the end of extended support, which was planned for 2014. To me, personally, that change to Windows 8 was not something I was losing sleep over. Neither was it the first upgrade Windows had seen, nor would it be the last, and it was also just one step to tick in my bigger transformation project. My sentiment, however, was not shared by one of the key employees. They were incredibly upset at the prospect of losing Windows XP to the point where they flat out told me they would quit if they lose the familiar blue taskbar. Needless to say, I was baffled by this outburst of emotion, and I have to admit I might have even asked that employee if they were for real. Because to me, it sounded like a very weird joke. Sadly, they were in fact for real, and while ultimately I could convince them to not quit, they took 2 weeks of leave, and we spent that time working it out. I found a way to relate to their insecurity about the change, and they calmed down and gave Windows 8 a shot. What I learned from that very first project, though, was that in order to transform, we need to understand the nature of change. In our context, change is more than just a new tool. It is a new way of working. Therefore, it affects behavior, identity, and sometimes even power dynamics. Change is not neutral. It triggers emotions: confusion, fear of being replaced, or simply fatigue. And sometimes this emotion can be rationalized, but even more often, like in my story just now, it's irrational and it defies any logic. Particularly in law or in professional services, where stability and precedent are valued, change can feel threatening. There is a key distinction we need to keep in mind. Implementation is not adoption. Implementation means that the tool works. Adoption means that people use it and they use it well. You can implement the tool in weeks if needed, but adoption takes months, sometimes even longer. And that's why tech rollouts without change management often stall or even fail. Let's talk about a few key principles that support successful change, the core principles of any change project, if you wish. The first one is communication. Be clear in your communication, be consistent, and be credible. Explain the why behind the change, and don't overpromise. People don't resist change, they resist uncertainty, and the second your story becomes selling about the utopia, people will just naturally react to it with a bit of skepticism. Second, we have involvement. Don't just impose the change on people, but rather build it with them. Bring the users in early. Use feedback loops and try to identify both the champions, but also the resistors. Thirdly, leadership and sponsorship, and that is sometimes more often where projects fail. If senior leaders are disengaged, so is everyone else. You surely have heard about the phrase that you usually don't apply for the job, you apply for the leader, you apply for the person that inspires you. And that is true when it comes to change as well. You need visible, ongoing support from decision makers, not just at the launch and at the, for the LinkedIn post of your new cool project, but throughout. If, for example, associates don't see a partner engage with the tool, actively using it, why should they? Why shouldn't they revert to the good old ways? Next up is training and support. Training isn't a one-off event. It's a process. And that's a mistake that happens quite often, and I'll admit I've made that mistake multiple times. You implement a new process or tool, you kick it off with training sessions, usually delivered by your service providers, and then that's that. You need to make sure that training and support is provided throughout. You need to make sure that people are enabled to succeed. Build their confidence, and also make sure you celebrate progress, no matter how slow that progress might come. I've mentioned the feedback loops, and they tie in quite well with the whole communication part. It is important to create safe spaces for people to ask questions, share concerns, and suggest improvements. And you'd be surprised how often you can find new ways to implore a tool or a process simply by listening to feedback. Change is a dialogue, it is never a broadcast. Before I move on to how tech implementation can become a success, let's have a look at common challenges, and I'm sure you'll at least recognize one of them. First up is the ever-loved, we have always done it this way. Yeah, cool, but there is a reason right now you are asked to change. Secondly, we have neither money nor time for this. Anyone who's ever tried to kick off a new innovation process specifically gets told, we need to see the benefit in this and we need to see it immediately. And that's simply not true with innovation. It's more a trial and error process. And then, of course, your project might not be the only one that's being considered at the moment. So there might be other projects in place. There might be other people who believe their project is more important and that can simply not understand why your project was given the go-ahead. How can we make sure we can navigate through those hurdles? Well, let me walk you a bit through a typical implementation journey. If you do it well, you'll be able to circumvent those naysayers and those problems. Start with defining the problem, not just the tool. Start with the outcome. What issue do you actually want to solve? It's tricky to scale it back to the problem statement, especially as we're all faced with cool new technology at every space, every conference we go to, at every time we talk to colleagues. And you might think, yeah, that sounds cool, I want that too. But please think about what are you actually want to achieve. No one wants another tool. What they want is a better way of working. Second up is map. And by map, I mean stakeholder mapping. Who is affected by that new tool or that new process? Who influences others? If you start mapping out those resistant points and allies, you can craft an effective communication strategy to make sure you get everyone on board. Change travels through people, not through departments. So it's important that you take the time to learn who your allies, but also who your haters might be. And then comes the part that brings innovation professionals to their knees, and not in a good way, the pilot and iterating phase. Start small, test, refine. A pilot or a test phase lets you show early wins and build confidence before rule out. That is also the part that is hardest to sell to leadership, because how do you explain people that you need time and money to just try things out? However, if you can successfully sell the whole implementation journey, they might be more likely to agree with you on that. Finally, you've reached the exciting time of rollout. And we come to the last step, and that is roll it out with a support structure. Offer targeted communications, support materials, and champions across teams. What you want is people saying, I get it, I've tried it, and I believe it helps me. And not pictured on this, but as a next logical step after your implementation journey is what I would call a step 5. Reinforce, recognize, and reward. Follow up. If you recognize those early adopters, those people that champion your product, you make sure that on one hand you have achieved a level of satisfaction within the users, but you also have a chance to highlight success stories. Show how the change adds value, not only to the organization, but also to the individual. Let me share a quick example. A mid-sized firm introduced a document automation tool to streamline NDA creation. A few years back, this was all the rage, and everyone who sold document automation as a first use case always told you, you can streamline NDA creation. They bought it, and the tool worked, but after the launch, usage dropped off sharply. So what did they do to turn this ship around? They relaunched the tool with a better communication strategy by showing clear benefits, user stories, and they also offered team-level training. So it wasn't just the generic big rollout training videos. They took the time to actually do some sort of roadshow and travel from team to team to make sure they got team-level training. They adopted and appointed automation champion in each practice group and team that acted as a multiplier of the message, but also as a first point of contact for the teams for any questions relating to document automation. And they collected feedback monthly, and by doing this, were able to improve templates quite quickly and, more importantly, based on real needs. Within a few months, usage has doubled, and more importantly, users began asking for more automation, not less. And that's the power of combining tech with structured change. To wrap up, let me leave you with 3 messages. Engage early and often. Change isn't something you do to people, it's something you do with them. So if you plan on kicking off a new project, innovation project, or any tech project, make sure you bring it to the people and engage with them. Lead with purpose, not just process. A process is great, I love a process, but people need to know why this change matters. And again, both to the business, but also to them personally. And this is where you can iron out all those anxieties people might have around being replaced or working less efficiently or feeling an impact on them personally. And last but not least, technology success is human success. Tools don't create value unless people use them, trust them, and build on them. And with that, I'd be happy to talk with you about your experiences in innovation. Any questions? Well, I seem to have baffled all of you, that's great. In this case, oh, there's one.
Kathrin, how long have you been using the change framework that you referenced?
For about the better part of the last 6 years.
Because I think from government's position, we do follow the framework in everything we do. So could I borrow you for all my future presentations, please?
Sure.
Because I think it really empathises with the fact that actually engagement, consultation, I think government's got a history of consulting and just using pure consultation rather than actually engaging with stakeholders prior to consulting, so there are no surprises.
So when undertaking this sort of change product, how do you balance your time between spending time with your champions versus decision makers versus detractors from the program? How do you sort of balance your own time with managing that?
You approach them at different stages in the process. I mean, you need the decision makers on board in order to get anything signed off, in order to even kickstart that. So the decision makers are engaged at the start of it, but then they usually are quite happy with just regular updates. Once, for example, if a management has signed off on something, they are really not interested again until it comes to budget renewal. So as long as everything goes great and no one questions what that money goes to, everyone's happy. Then you'd want to find both your champions and your resistors, and depends on really how much hate this project is getting, how much time you have to spend on convincing them. I have to say that you will never get 100% of people on board, but you need to make sure that especially those who are very vocal in their dislike of the new project get a different perspective and hopefully jump ship and change over to your dark side of change.
Thank you.
Now, I am a lawyer, and I very much understand we are the most irritating creatures on earth. And it's always really good to hear from non-lawyers who are trying to change the way lawyers work. What would you say is the worst trait of a lawyer and the best trait of a lawyer? You can be honest.
I can start with the worst, which is also the best. So lawyers are just so risk-averse that getting them to trust technology over their own knowledge is frustrating at times. Especially when we are now looking into AI implementation and the whole world that opens up there technology-wise. It can be frustrating if you're faced with someone who tells you flat out, but I know better. And that, at this point, is still true, but that might change over the next few years. The best part about lawyers is, though, once they've committed to change, they stick with it. So at least you don't have anyone jumping ship midway through the process. Usually, once you've got them convinced, they have adjusted to that new way of working, and then they sail with it.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm one of those irritating lawyers. What would you say? I mean, you mentioned earlier you've got your champions and you've got your haters. What would you say are your usual objections to your process, to the project?
It depends on who is affected by that. When I look at, on the lawyer side, the biggest objection usually is around the risk factor. How much can we trust that, and how can we sell that to the client? That is a huge question that always kind of swings with this as well. But what's often overlooked when it comes to the resistance part is business services are usually much more affected by that as well. I mean, finance teams when it comes to billing, all these kinds of things. And this is usually where I find the most resistance during a project. Really not trying to blame the finance guys here, but they are often overlooked in those processes, and they are often confronted with something, so it's only natural that their response to it is, the first response is always an immediate no before you can you can introduce them to the project. This is why it's so important to make sure that you map out your stakeholders and not only start with the legal teams you want to convince, but also make sure you get everyone on board who might be affected by that from a business service side of things.
Hi, Kathrin. I'm not a lawyer, but I do speak to a lot, and I find that conversations about AI and trust in particular can very much sway to we are starting to use it, but we still don't fully trust it. So what do you think it will take for the levels of trust to really increase?
An approach that we have taken now is actively encouraging our users to not use it in a work context, or not only use it in a work context, but make them get familiar with it on a private side first. So ask it about planning your holiday, these kind of things, write a poem about your cat. If you get more familiar with how these things work, then I feel also lawyers, as a risk-averse group, are more likely to accept the benefit of what they see in their private life, also in their work life. Also making sure that you ground the AI used in law firms in good data, be it either your own DMS, and we could all argue now how much good data is in there, but also in systems that are ring-fenced, for example, when we look at the likes of Thomson Reuters Co-Counsel that leverages that support, or Lexis that leverage that vetted knowledge stuff versus just freely available versions that trawl through everything and are more likely to come up with hallucinations.
There you go. Oh, is it working?
Lawyer. I'm an innovation advisor. So I have to run lots of pilots, and sometimes it can be quite tricky to get the lawyers to engage in the pilot process because they're so busy. So what top tips have you got for a successful pilot?
You have to force them. I'm really sorry, but that's the only way it goes. I mean, I think it is absolutely understandable that fee-earning work comes first. It's the whole business model of a law firm. And if there is not a top-down mandate for people to actively engage, and however that might look like is probably specific to the firm. Is this a certain amount of innovation hours you have to book, or these kind of things? But if there is not a mandate to change from the top, you will only get those cool, edgy people that already want to change the way they work, but probably not the masses. So yeah, it is tough, but the simple answer is you have to kind of force them into it, sadly.
Thanks.
Any more questions? Okay. Could you all put your hands together, please?